Okay, welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
My name's Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go, Josh. Week number 2. I'm doing this strange recording.
Yeah, week number 2 of the coronavirus version of the Actor and the Engineer podcast. So Paul is quarantined in Maryland. I'm here in North Carolina, and so we don't have access to all the equipment that we normally have access to. So the sharp-eared listeners might have heard last week our Invisible Man podcast sounded a little different. That's because Paul's side was a Skype recording instead of being the really nice, fine audio recording from a good microphone and all that. So this week's going to be the same, and we'll be this way until the world decides to get a little bit more normal. But yeah, so it's of all the things that are going on, that's actually one of the least important things going on. But yeah, so that is a little bit different, but we make it work.
You know how people ask the question if your glass is half full or half empty?
Mm-hmm.
I'm always glad I have a glass, just a glass. Whether or not it's full or not, I'm just glad I have something to catch the liquid if it comes my way. This is how I look at it. I look at it like, well, the good is that I don't have my computer with me either, my laptop with me either. So I can't make any references to anything when we're talking about technical things about a movie, names and all that other stuff. But actually, that works out really well for me, especially this week because we're talking about a French film. And I won't know how to pronounce any of those names anyway. So I can use the excuse, I don't have my laptop. I don't know her name, Josh. And then you can go ahead and do your excellent pronunciation of all the words. So that's how I look at it. That might sound a little wonky, the recording, but at the same time, there's good and bad and everything. So
I'll at least try, but I think that the movie we're talking about is Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which came out last year and is now available to watch on Hulu, actually. So it's a French film directed by Céline Sciamma, and it stars Noémie Merlant and Adèle Haenel, and it's about two women. One woman is called, she's an artist, she's called to this island off of France, and she's commissioned to paint a portrait of the other woman played by Adèle Haenel, and for her marriage, potential marriage to someone in Italy. So this is set in the late 18th century, and it's a romance between these two women, a romance that develops between these two women throughout the course of the film. So how did you like it? I just want to get that out of the way first of all. I think I know your answer, but how did you like it?
Oh, it's beautiful. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
It's just beautiful. Everything about it is gorgeous.
Mm.
The cinematography is lush and rich and deep, and just the textures of the clothes that you can see, the colors of the clothes. I love the fact that they're wearing basically the same dresses all the way through the whole entire movie.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like an insignificant thing to most people, but it actually says a lot about characters, the colors you put on. I had to take costume construction when I was in theater school, so it's something that was put into my brain, and I'm a better artist for it. And when I do notice things like that and they don't interrupt the flow of the movie, they add to it. It's just a really beautiful movie. I can't say anything. I don't have anything bad to say about it. Nothing. And
Yeah.
It is going to be the movie where, it won the Cannes Film Festival Best Original Screenplay,
Mm-hmm.
was not nominated for any Oscars. And this was a tight year this year. And I went back and looked at the Oscars that were nominated, or I'm sorry, the screenplays that were nominated for original. And it was a tight year. And I think maybe in years to come, we might look back and say this should have been on that list.
Yeah.
Parasite won, deservedly so. And it would have not taken my vote away from Parasite by any stretch of the imagination. But this has some of the best lines in a movie I have seen in a long time. And I want them on T-shirts, and I want to wear them around proudly because they're so beautiful. And I hope the translation is right, because you're never sure.
Yeah.
You're never sure how. So I went and I looked things up to try to find out if the subtitles, I guess, were accurate. And pretty much every website that I went to had the same lines and used the same lines, subtitles that I saw in the movie. So people talked about this movie, and I knew to go see it, and I just didn't. And somebody said to me, I was just texting a buddy of mine before the podcast, and he was like, "You haven't seen this?" Whatever movie he was talking about at the time. And I was like, "I can't see everything." Like I know I have a love for movies, but I can't see everything. And so this falls into that category. Would it made my top 10 list? I'd have to go back and look at my top 10 list to argue that point, if you will. But it really is just beautiful.
Yeah. I loved it. And I think for me, I think, yes, the screenplay, but then also the cinematography, it needed to be in that conversation in the Oscars, and it just wasn't there, which is sad. But I was kind of amazed by this movie. I think that the film is, I've not seen any of Celine Sciamma's other films, but it seems like she has such a grasp on filmmaking and on the capabilities of a film, as far as the ability for emotional modulation and also just visual stimulation, as far as images. And so I think that she has a good balance between being able to manipulate the feelings of the audience, and then also by visuals, and also because she wrote the screenplay too, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But and then the stars of the film are great too. Noemi Merlant and Adele Hanel, who I guess Celine Sciamma has worked with before, in one of her previous films, or maybe a couple of them. I'm not sure. But yeah, I was kind of amazed. And I watched it twice actually. So I watched it last week, and then I watched it again Monday night. And I'm glad I did, because the first time I was so like locked in on the craft of the filmmaking that I think that I may have missed. Well, I did miss a lot of the emotions that were on the screen. I don't necessarily I don't get wrapped up in emotional movies. Steph and I just watched Love Actually this weekend, and like that is an emotional movie, and that is a manipulative movie, and I mean purposefully so. I think Richard Curtis knows what he's doing, and I think in the same way Celine Sciamma knows what she's doing, but she like raises the bar on filmmaking with Portrait of a Lady on Fire compared to something like Love Actually. There's more nuanced shots, and the I keep coming back to the word craft. The craft of filmmaking is at a higher level for this movie. I mean, this is like the shot selection, the lighting choices, and the utilization of the material that she has, whether it's the camera that she's using or how they light certain shots. And then I haven't even gotten into the sound design of this movie, which is second to none.
Amazing.
When did you
Amazing.
realize there was no score?
I didn't, but what I did realize was that every sound effect, or I guess sound effect,
Sure.
was fire. The wind in the forest, or the wind in wherever they were at. I think it's the beach. It's a wooded area that they're at. When you listen to it, if you closed your eyes, it sounds like the fire.
Yeah.
In the fire. Did you notice that?
Well,
there's also the wind blowing on the beach,
and
sounded like fire. And I was like, yes, totally.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I think
brilliant.
The fact that this, I mean, if you haven't seen the movie, like there's really no score. There's selective music in the film, and it is used to amazing effect. There's only a handful of scenes where music is incorporated, and it is purposeful. It is character driven, and if there was a score, it probably would have taken away from those scenes. But the fact that Celine Sciamma had the balls to do that, because even if one of Steph's favorite, media items, it's not a movie, it's a extended series, is the Pride and Prejudice from the 90s with Jennifer Ailey and Colin Firth. She loves that thing, and it is very well scored. It has a good score and uses music in it and all that stuff, and that's what you expect out of something that's like a period piece like this. But this movie utilizes those sounds, whether it's the fire or whether it's the echoing of putting a plate down on a table,
Yes, or the creak of the wood.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
and even to the most effect, it uses the brush on the canvas. I mean, it is so closely mic'd, and it just feels like, to me, it's like ASMR doesn't really do anything for me. Like the people on YouTube that like brush on the microphones and stuff, they like, brush on the microphone and all that, but
Yeah.
that doesn't do as much for me. But there are scenes in movies that give me that same effect, that same like tingling effect in, starting at my head and kind of going down throughout my body. And that is something that speaks to me more than something like, an ASMR video would. But just, getting that kind of and if you had a score underneath it, I think that it would take away from it. But I thought that all that stuff, I felt like the first time I watched this movie, I was like, I was afraid that I was gonna miss something. And and after watching it a second time, I was able to kind of connect a little bit more, I think, with the characters. But I did also want to bring up the fact that, like, the two words that I used in that I was using kind of in my head to kind of like boil it down was craft was one of them, but also rhythm is the other one. And I think rhythm has a lot to do with the screenplay, like you talked about, and then also the use of sound and shot selection and rule of threes, things like that. There's certain things that come in to into frame. There's a particular shot of the Eloise character, played by Adele Hanel, that shows up once and it seems a little out of place. You see it a second time, and then you kind of know that it's gonna be paid off a third time. And there's things like that where I think that Celine Sciamma is utilizing the tools, the kind of like tried and true storytelling tools, but then at the same time she's also trying to subvert them in certain ways, and I guess we can get to that in a little bit. But then also just in reading about the movie, and then in hearing some interviews with all of the main players of this movie, they talk about the gaze, and I think that this is a really kind of like meta movie because we're watching someone look at someone, and the Marianne character, who's the painter, she's not supposed to tell Eloise that she's going to paint her, so she's trying to like steal looks, and she's trying to really focus on things. And Siama uses the camera as her eyes, kind of like a first person thing, and that allows us to kind of put ourselves in that Marianne, in that artist character, and to see the world from the way that an artist sees the world. And in a lot of ways, see the world in the way that the director probably sees the world. So I thought that was super interesting. And I got a lot out of that too. I just got done reading a couple books. One book was Easy Riders, Raging Bulls by Peter Biskind. And it's kind of like talking about like from pretty much Bonnie and Clyde up through the mid 80s and the kind of like new Hollywood, as far as Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Peter Bogdanovich, like all these guys, and kind of how they made their movies and how they were able to make movies that wouldn't have been able to be made, 10 years before. And that was really interesting. And it really kind of brought up a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of kind of nasty guys, nasty stories in that book. And a lot of it has to do with men taking advantage of women for the sake of art. And this movie, I think, is kind of like a counterpoint to that. And then the other book that I just finished was Making Movies by Sidney Lumet. And he pretty much breaks down like his whole career, and he gets very granular about how he makes movies. And that kind of put me in the mind frame of him. And I think that this movie does the same thing, puts you in the mind frame of a creator, specifically, I think, a filmmaker, but through the lens of a painter. And I thought that was really, really cool. And yeah, it was awesome.
Well, strange reference, but of course you've seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, correct?
Yeah.
And they go to the museum, the Chicago Museum of Fine Art,
Yep.
and you see the French Impressionist and the Pointillism paintings. And John Hughes does that really cool thing where he shows all three of them are at the painting in different positions, and then the camera zooms in, zooms in, zooms in, zooms in. You realize it's dots on top of dots on top of dots on top of dots, which is basically pointillism slash French Impressionism, which a lot of people would be mad that I just said that. But to make the point, no pun intended, that filmmaker, John Hughes, showed us something. Not only it is the perception of the person where they're standing looking at the picture, the light, the time of day, your perception of a painting is different depending on where you're standing, which I thought was brilliant. And then he shows the audience that this is the technique that they use to make these amazing paintings. And it's that really famous, I can remember the play. I can't remember the name. I think it's Sunday in the Park. I can't remember the name of the painting.
With all the people sitting, and there's like the lady with the umbrella, and everybody's kind of like sitting on picnics and stuff. Yeah,
and the Simpsons have famously made a picture out of that with all of the characters from the Simpsons in the same poses. Lots of people have. DC Comics, lots of people have done it. But it's a very, very important point that John Hughes is trying to show us, no pun intended again with point, that this is what the painting is about. And it's not condescending, and it's not showing you that we know something about art that you don't know. Hey, audience members, this is what this painting is made of. And I think that, tell me the director's name again for Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
Celine Sciamma.
Celine Sciamma. Okay, I'll get it. What she does is, I used to draw, and I used to love to draw. I was never great at it, but better than some, not as great as others. Let's put it that way. And I had kind of a knack for it. And somebody taught me that, and it might have even been a comic book, taught me that the body is proportional in places. So your forearm is the size of your head, and your chest to your belly button is the size of two of your heads. And so if you draw circles, that's how you could form a body. And then you form a body around that. So that's basically what the filmmaker is doing. She's allowing you to know that through those first kind of, and it's so brilliant what she does later on too, but I'll get to that in a second. She shows you that one stroke, this stroke, that stroke forms the basis of the head of the first portrait that you see her painting. And I love the fact that you see her painting with that stick that has that kind of material on the end of it that runs all the way in front of her, that she leans her hand on.
Oh, yeah. The stabilizing thing that's got like a ball on the end of it. Yes, that's so cool.
Correct. So she can't touch, so she doesn't accidentally touch the painting with her hand, which is amazing because to me, that's a filmmaker allowing a person into what an artist does, what a painter does, because who knows about that kind of stuff? Mm-hmm. But it's in a non-condescending way. It's not like, hey, look at us, we know so much about art and we're going to show you what we know. It's actually character-based. It actually shows you how she first sees Eloise and how Marianne sees her to begin with, because she is not posing for her in the beginning. She just has to steal looks and go back and paint her based on what she has seen in her eyes, her mind's eye. And what those strokes show you is how the basis of a painting starts. And then later on, when she's actually posing for her, the way she starts those strokes are almost in completely different positions than when she started it just from her mind's eye. And to me, that's just a director gently showing you that this technique is different when the person is sitting in front of you than it is when you're just trying to imagine this person sitting in front of you. And it's so delicately done. And you're right. Whatever that YouTube stuff that you were calling, I don't quite get that beer opening thing and then the scratching thing. People are into it, but that's not my. What is it called?
ASMR.
And what does that stand for?
It stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response. It's just a fancy word for people get a feeling, and it's not, I mean, you could say it's an intimate feeling because it's one person doing something that's directly physically affecting another person's body. It's through sound, it's not through touch, but it is intimate in that way. But the people who are, I guess, really, really into it don't necessarily say it's sexual, but it is an intimacy that is developed between the performer and the viewer or the listener or whatever. And it's something that it's like those 3D paintings, or not paintings, those 3D graphics in the 90s. Like I could never see the hidden image inside there. Either. but I know that like
Never.
there were people that like really loved that stuff. So like I can only imagine what those people saw in the moment that that locked in for them, but I don't know what that felt like. And so I can only approximate that. And I have gotten that kind of like, tingly feeling, but that tingly feeling I would get from art in, I have never gotten it from visual art, movies somewhat, but it's mainly music that has done that to me, and music in movies specifically has done that for me. But I'm not an ASMR, expert, but I can imagine that what Celine Sciamma is doing in this film is evocative of that. It's what she's hoping. Because if you throw music on top of that, we would lose all of those nuances. And just the fact that at night they had to have a fire, number one, to stay warm, and number two, to light the room, because they didn't have, electricity back then. That is a built-in soundtrack for their lives. And just the fact of a woman walking across the room on a hardwood floor with these, solid shoes, like that has a sound, and just the rhythm of the walk and how fast the walk is based on whether whether you're, there's a scene when she's trying on the dress that she's supposed to be painting, and and then she hears a knock on the door and she has to run behind a curtain to take off the dress, because Marianne doesn't want Eloise to know that she's wearing the dress. And so there's all these scenes that are informed by the sound. Also, I did want to bring up, you kind of talked about the process and kind of like showing us behind the curtain. I think that behind the curtain of creating art, and how they do this really well in this film. One scene that really kind of like tricked the audience, or at least me, it got me to super focus in the moment, was when it's when she's still trying to kind of steal glances at portions of Eloise. Marianne's still trying to observe Eloise from afar and try to figure out if she can reconstitute the image of Eloise, remotely and later on. And one quick scene was her focusing on Eloise's hands and how they were kind of placed. And you could tell by seeing Marianne look at Eloise's hands, and then there's the shot of Eloise's hands from Marianne's point of view. And at that moment, I was like, I need to look at these hands so intently so that I can, I felt the pressure of what she was feeling to get that in my head, and to try to understand all the little nuances and details and shadows and the placement of each finger, and all of these things, like how her nails look, as far as like, are they longer or shorter, or all of these things, and creases in her hand or whatever. And I felt the pressure, because I knew that there was only going to be so much time when that shot of her hands was on screen, and that's exactly what Marianne was feeling at that time. And then so the next scene is her like kind of running off behind a rock and trying to like quickly draw that. But it's a really good way, I think, of putting us as the viewer into the situation of Marianne, and into the point of view of Marianne. So it's really cool.
Well, let me backtrack really quick. I want to go back to the 1990s pictures, the 3D pictures. I could never really do them, but I could start to see the image, and it always blew my mind, because I always assumed whatever the image was going to be was like a fully formed image that looked like a boat or whatever, or it's usually like tigers or bears or something like that. And it's not. It's the actual color of whatever that print was. So that always blew my mind. It was the shape of a dolphin, but it was the color of whatever that picture was. It wasn't like a fully formed looking dolphin. So my mind could never really grasp it. I could see it sort of. And back to your whole thing about sound and music, I love that about you, first of all, that's the one thing that does it for you. I'm kind of lucky, because all of those elements can work for me. The sound, the music, the emotion, the actual acting, all kind of make it gel. The good thing about that is that it's a fully formed movie the first time I see it. The not great thing about that, if you want to call it that, is that sometimes I don't hear those things, sometimes as well as you do, or don't perceive things because I'm so focused on the color of her dress or the emotion in her face. And so when a director takes the time to slow something down and actually hear their charcoal going up against the actual canvas, the muslin, it brings you to what it must be like when you're actually making a painting like that. The sensory overload of those effects. And you're absolutely right. If there was a soundtrack to that, it would have distracted from what the point of hearing the charcoal go up against the canvas. And the way that the satin dress, when it's coming down the hallway, which is brilliant, by the way, when you first see the green dress coming down the hallway and you hear it and you hear the walking and the way it's shot, and it's sort of a spoiler. So I'm going to go ahead and say spoiler alert. I don't think it's going to ruin anything for anybody, but I wouldn't want to be told this without prior knowledge of it might be a spoiler. So spoiler alert from this point on. Not that there's anything major going on in this movie, but it's not like I'm your father, search your soul, Luke. It's not that. But it is. Well, I mean, it's not. I mean, that's.
Wait a second. Are you saying that Darth Vader is Luke's father? Is that what you just told me?
You know what? You're just like my buddy Terry. He does that. He does that thing to me every time. And you know what? Speaking of T-shirts, he has said some things, and you have said some things that I think we need to start our own T-shirt collection because you guys would get along because you would spend the rest of your evening dissing on me like that because it is just in your nature. Yes, I am saying that Darth Vader is Luke's father. Actually, I never said Darth Vader, and I never said Luke until the very end. So technically, you spoiled it, not me. And that's exactly what I would tell Terry too. What's up, Terry Coughlin? Anyway, when you see that dress coming down the hallway, you're thinking somebody's wearing it.
Yep.
Because the way it's shot and the footsteps, and you can actually see the feet underneath it, and the way it's hitting the wall and scraping the wall, and then they kind of move away from the wall and they keep walking and you hear the footsteps. It's so brilliant how just those everyday normal sound effects emotionally affect a person when you're watching a movie. It's amazing to me. And then you find out that the dress is being carried by the other young cook, I guess she is, or assistant in the house.
She's kind of the maid, I guess. Member. Yeah.
Yeah, the maid. Yeah. She's
Sophie is the character's
Sophie?
name.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Also, side note, if I go in and out because of my phone, in case anybody notices that, sometimes I will go in and out. I meant to mention that at the top of the podcast too, so I apologize. Hopefully it makes me sound smarter the way that does that, but probably not. Anyway, there's a scene where I think it's the first time, Sophie, she's cooking something and she's preparing a tray of food, and she also gives Marianne food at the same time. And in the back, there's a pot cooking food in the fire, and you can actually hear it bubbling and steaming like a bubble does when like you're making mashed potatoes and it bubbles up and steams up. It is amazing how distinct that sound is. And I'm thinking it's all the way down to that sound. It's so specific, the sound design, because that had to be added in. There's no way that was done during first principle shooting. There's no way. First of all, it's hard to mic those kind of things. Second of all, it's hard to pick up those kind of things. Most dialogue, depending on like the beach scenes and walking, were probably all looped in later on because you can't boom mic any of that stuff. And so it's hard, especially with walking scenes or running scenes. You have to go in the studio and loop your dialogue in. So that sound design was designed for that. That's amazing to me that somebody thought, let's take the most minuscule, minute thing of that scene and make it as important as anything else in that scene. Because it stuck out to me. Those sounds stuck out to me. And what it did was grounded the movie in realism for me. That this was not going to be a movie. Yes, the thing that you're talking about with the white dress that happens 3 times, the motif of that has kind of a mystical feel to it. Mm-hmm. But that's because that's in her mind's eye.
Well, and it's due to the lighting too. The lighting is way out of place, and the first time you see it, like that's not right. It just feels wrong. It feels weird, but it's a consistent.
You know
lighting.
What it reminded me of? It reminded me of how they used to take black and white photographs and paint over them, And my mother has a wedding. Her wedding pictures are in black and white. And she has one of her that's just her in the dress. And all of the bridesmaids' flowers are around the front of her dress. Somebody went in there and painted that,
Hmm.
white, blue, and all the colors of the bridesmaids' flowers and all that other stuff. And that's when you see that shot of the white dress for the first time. That's what that looked like.
Well, to like a colorization, yeah, it's like a colorization type thing. To me, it looked like a like at Walt Disney World, there's the Haunted Mansion, and they have the
Yeah,
ghosts
I love
that
that.
are going through,
I love
and they
that.
use just mirrors essentially to replicate that, and that's what it looked like to me. It looked like the Haunted Mansion ghost version of Eloise, and like I said, the lighting was completely different. It was daylight when both of the times that she sees her, previous to the last time that she sees her in that dress, it's during nighttime, and there's candlelight, and the color temperature of daylight is totally different than the color temperature of candlelight. So yeah, it stuck out to me the first time, and then like we said, we see it the second time. It's gonna pay off with the third. Everything in this film, I mean, it's so well written. Everything in the film, even the Orpheus story that in the middle of the film that is read by Eloise, that comes into play later on in the film, and is paid off in one of the last scenes that they have together. So, or the last scene that they have together. We haven't gotten into the fact that there are like no men in this film, and the reason why the film is the only kind of like conflict in the film is potentially due, I guess, is due to the position of women at that time in France, and I guess in the world at large, I guess. So that was an interesting point of view that I mean, I first of all, I don't know too much about history in France in the late 18th century, late 1700s, uh, but it was a learning experience for me, and just the fact that if this were a man and a woman back then that fell in love like this, that there would be no barriers between them getting together. But the fact that these are two women and they are at a particular station in life, they have very limited choices.
I don't. I think I kind of disagree with you there for a split second. I think that if it was a man and a woman and she was being married to somebody else, that has to do with
Oh,
position and money. That
yeah,
has to
well,
do
that's
with
true. That's true. I guess what I'm saying is that they don't really. I mean, all Marianne wants to do is be an artist and is be a painter, and there are roadblocks in her way. Now she fights through them, but there are definite roadblocks in a way. She brings up the fact that she can't paint men because that is something that is not considered proper, but that is also taking one tool out of her tool belt as far as her being able to be a painter. But I mean, she does it anyway, just kind of like in the background, or secretly she does it. But it's like there's definitely not an even playing field. And then Eloise character, she wasn't even supposed to get married. She wanted to stay in the convent, but because her sister killed herself, she's the last daughter of the family, and she needs to get married. I mean, it kind of goes back to, I guess, the Pride and Prejudice type stuff, where somebody's got to carry on the family has to perpetuate. She doesn't have the luxury of being able to stay in a convent. But yeah, so they're both in some ways hamstrung.
no. I don't necessarily. I guess disagree is a stronger word than I meant to use. I just think of all of those movies where it's happened a million times between a man and a woman. He's poor and she's poor, and the reason why she needs to marry is to keep the family alive. And, yes, they could go off and be poor together, which actually happens in Little Women, which she kind of complains about later on. The eldest sister complains about later on about being so
Hmm.
poor, but decides to marry for love. And I guess they could go off, if it was a man and a woman this story was about, they could go off and be poor, but then the family would die too. So
Hmm.
that pressure, I think right there is the same kind of pressure that you would feel regardless of whether or not it was the same sex couple or a heterosexual couple, because it's about the prosperity of the family. Now,
Hmm.
the difference is that if the man was poor and the woman decided, screw you, mom, I'm going to go and fall in love and be in love anyway, they could live their life together.
in the open, I guess. Yeah, they could.
Yeah, and the huge difference is, yeah, out in the open. Exactly. So that's basically what I was trying to say, that
Hmm.
I've seen it a million times in storylines of movies or books or plays where, I Dune is getting ready to come up. No spoiler for Dune. It's the same exact story, basically. And I don't know if you know anything about Dune, but it's pretty much the same thing happens. You marry to keep these empires going and these families going versus falling in love with your blue-eyed Fremen woman and deciding to go off with her. Well, you can't do that because then this whole empire will fall apart. So that is essentially a storyline that we've been dealing with for
Yep.
forever since we've been telling stories.
Maybe a better comparison would be something like Romeo and Juliet, where there's just no way that those two characters, those two families could be together in a genial way. It's built, the whole star-crossed lovers thing, it's built from the beginning to be somewhat of a tragedy. And while you're watching Romeo and Juliet or reading the play or, seeing a performance of it, you're hoping for some sort of like amicable end. You're hoping for the bow at the end that says, "Oh, everything is fine," and they all go riding off into the sunset. But the system that's in place at that point in time, they're kind of doomed. And in the same way, this relationship's doomed.
Yeah, but Shakespeare makes it very clear with that guy's speech at the end, like, "How dare you? Look what you did to your kids." He
Mm,
points the fingers right at the family fathers and goes, "What is
yeah.
wrong with you people? Look what you did. This is on you. Over what?
Mm,
Over a blood feud? Over a money feud? Over you thinking you're a better family than you're?" And Mercutio says it at the beginning. "A plague on all your houses. You
hmm.
guys are screwed up. What is wrong with you?" So in a way, it is a little different, but I get where you're saying, I get where you're making that comparison because there's a great line in the movie that she says that sums this up. She says, "Don't regret, remember." And then you see at the end what you see
Mm.
in the painting. And I was like, "Ugh, I love everything about that." I love everything about that. There's nothing wrong with that moment. It's probably what, I'm not even going to say something like that, but it's just I get it. I get why that moment had to happen. It had to happen like that. We can talk about that a little bit later on,
Yeah.
if you want to, but
Sure, I definitely do want to talk about the end, like especially the last two big scenes, after Marianne leaves. But yeah, as far as that kind of like middle section there, there's a lot going on, and I thought that it was interesting that they make sure that each of the female characters, and the mom not as much, the mom is played by Valeria Golino, which when I saw her, I thought of Hot Shots. Have you seen that movie from the '90s with
I
Charlie Sheen? You haven't seen that
know
movie?
what you're talking about, but
Oh yeah, she was in Hot Shots, but she was Tom Cruise's girlfriend in Rain Man.
that was the mother of the.
That's the mother. Yeah, she has a distinct face. Like I saw her face, and even though her hair is totally different, I saw her face, and I was like, I totally know. Because she was hot in the '80s, early '90s. So I was.
The way
was
they got her corseted up in this movie, she's not doing too bad. I'm just saying,
That's what I noticed. That like when
yeah,
the women breathe in this, it's kind of like
good Lord. It's like, there they are. Hello. And if I'm
So,
noticing them, they are there, like they are there. Anyway, she's a
but
beautiful woman, but I never put
yeah,
together that that's what she was, but I love her.
yeah, the women in the film, each of the women, art is a big part of each of their lives in a certain way. Each woman has an individual story to tell, and even especially like it's the Sophie character. Obviously, we find out that that she's pregnant, but then also at the same time she's doing this kind of like needlepoint at the beginning before we
Love
find out that she's pregnant, and we see the needlepoint at the end, and her character definitely has an arc in the film, and what her character goes through, and her character's the payoff for her character, I think, is after she gets the abortion by the I don't know what you would call her, like the community medicine woman, I guess. That scene,
Sure.
I can't. I felt like we as an audience were getting totally manipulated by putting that baby on the bed with her. I
But
was
no,
like,
but it's all
it
throughout the film. That
yeah,
juxtaposed ideas all throughout the film. The needlepoint is the prime example. In the beginning, when she's needle pointing the rosemary, it's full bloom.
that's right. It's
And then at the
beautiful.
end,
Yeah.
once her picture's full bloom, the actual flowers have
Are
died
dead.
down. So
Yeah.
that imagery is throughout, because that kind of was like, wait, what is happening here?
But she finishes it. She finishes the needlepoint though.
Absolutely, but it's in complete juxtaposition of when it first started, though. Because
Hmm.
when she's first starting, it's just one little plume, I don't know what you call it, of a sprig of rosemary, and then
Hmm.
there's a full bloom in the flower pot, and then at the end, it's the opposite. So and if you think about it, those women are free in themselves to do what they need to do to survive,
Hmm.
thus getting an abortion, thus falling in love with another woman, and acting on that, but yet they're completely tied up when it comes to clothing, and they're completely strapped by society. And you see that in that abortion scene when the little girl is trying to take out the corset of the Sophie character, and she's having to pull out the string and pull out the string, pull out the string. I think it's that scene. It might be another scene actually where you see her unstrapping somebody. But anyway, I thought that that was a bit heavy-handed with the baby on the bed, but then it dawned on me throughout the whole film like that.
Yeah, I think the point that that Celine Sciamma is making in that particular scene, I mean, it's very heavy-handed. Number one, it's like there's no tricking yourself. The Sophie character is not tricking herself and saying that like this this was never going to happen. Like she's seeing what could be her baby next to her, and at the moment that she is making the decision, it has the agency of saying like I don't want a baby right now, and then the Marianne character looks away. The artist looks away, and Eloise goes to her and says like, "No, you watch this."
You need to look.
And
Yeah, you need to
and
watch
yeah,
this.
you need to look. And I think that that is saying that this is a difficult decision, but you need to face it. You know, it's not her decision. It's not Marianne's decision, but you need to face it for, I don't know, for womankind. But I don't want to speak for womankind or anything like that. But you need to at least acknowledge the gravity of the situation and not downplay it. Like that, it is a big decision, but it's something that needs to the weight of that decision needs to weigh on all the people involved. They drive the point home by saying afterwards, Eloise saying it was all encompassing, where Eloise said like we're going to paint, as opposed to like you're going to paint Sophie and me in a recreation of the scene. It's like we're going to paint, like they're going to make art. And I think that the art that they made, the art that she made on that little canvas, or maybe it was a piece of wood. I can't remember,
Yeah, it looked
but
like wood.
yeah, I think was wood. The art that she made was a piece of art that is solely feminist. I mean, it is women doing things that men probably don't want to see and may not have any interest in because those are woman things. Like the women go do the women things and they deal with that stuff and the men don't have to worry about it. But it's a, male dominated society where the men are creating a good chunk of the art. I know that there were women painters out there, women artists out there at the time, but I'm sure not in the same level popularity wise as the men. So something like that painting that she made that night, I'm guessing was probably not something that was seen by many people.
Well, first of all, the reason why it's on a piece of wood is because she only has two canvases. She only created two canvases, or she only brought two canvases with her.
Oh, I thought the canvases. Hey, well, yeah, we never talked about the beginning. Were those canvases? I thought those canvases were like her resume, two
No,
examples of her work. And when they
no,
fell
because she was already
overboard,
hired to do the job.
eh, she seemed like she was really distraught when she opened up that crate and the canvases were blank.
So she was using watercolors that would have been dissolved, is what
I
you're saying.
think so. I think
Oh,
so.
well, I thought she
Maybe.
was distraught because that's the only thing she had to create on. And she thought they
Mm,
were ruined, but then she dried them out because she paints two paintings of her, the one
yeah.
before she poses and then the one afterwards.
Yeah.
So those are the two canvases that she uses. So why would
Hmm.
she's hired for the job already? She was hired
I
as
don't know.
a female painter who was going to pose as a companion, because Eloise's mother says, she's sad and she's sullen because of her sister and because of all this.
Sure.
And by the way, I think that the mother has a full arc too, by the way. We don't need to get
Hmm.
into that, but I think per what she says in that conversation and then how she is at the end, I think there's a full arc right there. I think
Hmm.
you see her decisions that she made. I think you think they're different than what Eloise has made, but I think they're the same because women had to make choices, or women had to do things that were not part of their choices. And so
Hmm.
I think the mother does have that. I can't wait to go back and watch it again and see that woman's face because I loved her. And it's nice to see people who are continuously working. I love that. Anyway, so I think it's two canvases, but I might be wrong because where else did she get? Because those two canvases or that one canvas is what they nail up at the end, what the guy is putting the nails in at the end. It's the same size
Same
crate.
box. Yeah.
So where
Okay.
did she get the canvas that she painted on? Anyway, the point back to I think when she says you need to look at this or look during the abortion scene is this was about choice. And you
Hmm.
dropped the big F word, feminism, and I think it is a feministic statement
Yeah.
that she made a solid choice, a hard choice, but she made a choice. I'm not ready to have a kid right now.
Yep.
If this is what I have to go through, this is what I have to go through. And I think that Marianne turns away because of the graphic nature of what has to happen to a woman in order to abort a baby. I think that that's hard to watch. But I think the reason why Eloise turns to her and says, look, it's because we need to stand solid with our friend, with our fellow woman, that she made this choice and we need to stand solid and look at her in support of her choice.
Hmm.
That's what I got from that conversation. And then I
Yeah.
think it was solidified because when they first started to pose for the painting on the wood and she pulls her skirt up and her hand goes in, I thought, what is this all about? Like I didn't first get that they were recreating that scene. I didn't understand what was happening. But then I realized very quickly, and it was all through the actual painting. And whoever did those paintings are brilliant because even
Hmm.
in that basic sketch painting of that position, of that recreation, you can see that that's Sophie. You can see her facial structure in just a few strokes that the artist did.
Hmm.
I thought that was amazing. When you go
Yeah.
back and watch it, look at it again because it is very specific what her face looks like.
Yeah.
And I thought that's great.
The artist's name is Elaine Delmare. I think that's how you say her
Well,
name.
brilliant because just in a few brush strokes of just kind of different skin tone colors on her face, you could tell that was Sophie. But I
Mm.
thought that them recreating that situation was a photograph of what was happening because she
Yeah.
draws her later on and she draws a picture of her. Marianne draws a picture of herself in the book and on
On
that
page
page.
28.
Yes, I love
That's so
that.
cool.
God,
Yeah.
I love that. God, I just smacked my hip really hard because I love it so much.
I think that you kind of consolidated what I was trying to say a little bit better, I think, but I think that the big thing as far as Sophie's character is concerned is that having that baby on the bed with her, like she was so resolute in her choice, that baby on the bed was not going to stop her from going
Yeah,
forward with
yeah,
her choice and with the procedure, and that's just kind of like driving it home. I guess maybe there may be some people saying that like, oh, if they really realized how difficult it would be, that they wouldn't do this. I'm not a woman. I am not gonna ever be in that position, so I can't make any kind of like, definitive statements on that. So I'm gonna just leave that as it is. But the fact that this particular character, Sophie, made that choice and went through with it, even though there was a child hanging off of her, a little baby hanging off of her, like that is to be respected in the framing of this film. So
well, here's what's brilliant about this film. It's layered. A lot of people might think it's slow paced, which it is, but that's okay. It's purposely paced. But I actually don't think that that's fair to say it's slow. But we've talked about this a million times, both of us being punch drunk love fans, and how people say they're slow and then nothing happens. And I'm like, so many things are happening in that scene that we're not even really understanding it until right now when we're talking about it. It just dawned on me that not only is it hard enough to be a woman in this century, this time frame that this film is set in, not only do they have to make hard choices and stick by them regardless of what society might say or what might happen. Not only is this person young and probably will be able to have a baby in the future, but right now she doesn't want to have a baby. Women had to give other women abortions while their children were in the room because nobody was there to take care of the kids other than the women. So like the choices that women had were so confined.
Jeez.
That the baby, in order to make sure your baby was safe while you were giving some local woman an abortion, you had to place your baby on the bed to make sure your baby was safe and not walking out and doing whatever baby might do. That's crazy to me. That is a statement in amongst itself, above and beyond the whole thing. And you talked about, you're never going to be a woman. You're not in that position. I always jokingly say when people ask me questions about this subject, I say, well, when I grow a uterus and I get pregnant, I'll let you know what my opinion is. But until that day, it's not, it's not going to happen. So you have at it the way you want to. That's where I stand with it, because not to get too political about it, but and it's hard pressed to talk about these issues without sounding a political or having an opinion. But the bottom line is that this is a specific thing in this movie that happens. Yeah. And it makes a person watching the movie realize what difficulties women have had to go through in this world. And that's what they had to do. They had to watch their babies while they gave another woman an abortion. That to me is a statement in amongst itself.
Yeah, it's a confrontational scene. I think that, they're definitely, it's something you can't get away from. And it's also, I think that when she says, don't look away, watch, that's also the filmmakers telling the audience, like, no, you need to watch this.
Hands down. Not to mention all the hocus pocus stuff that she has to go through up to that point, hanging from whatever she was hanging from, drinking the potion, I don't know what you call it, the herbs or
roots
whatever.
Or something.
Herbs or whatever. It's very, very Hansel Gretel potion-esque looking to me. Not to demean anything in the movie by saying that. That's just probably my way of dealing with the uncomfortableness of the way that people had to be treated back then. But it's juxtaposed once again, because when they go to that bonfire where you see her catch on fire is the moment you realize they fall in love with each other. Mm-hmm. So that horrible thing has to happen in order for them to be focused on each other, meaning they went there so Sophie could talk to those local women about getting something else to drink and then hang from wherever she was hanging in the kitchen. And the poor thing fell. Funny, but it was just, I felt bad about laughing, but I was like, that has to be for comic timing. It just has to be. Because it's just so tense up to that point that you need something. But that's the moment they fall in love. And that's the moment that the title of the movie comes from. But yet it's juxtaposed with Sophie trying to find poison to abort her own baby. Brilliant. That's a freaking screenplay, man.
That's true. That's another great use. Well, it's one of the two great uses of music in the film. And when I heard that kind of like, it was like, do you remember when they used to play the THX sound before movies? And it kind of all started with a conglomeration of sounds, just like a whole orchestra, everybody playing different notes, and then they all glide into a particular note. And that's what it sounded like to me. I was like, what is going on here? And then you realize that it's all the women starting to kind of like get together and start to sing that kind of like driving, trance-like type of a song. And that's another example of women creating art. And, there's not a man in sight. And it's these women, coming together and creating this art for each other. That was a cool scene. And it kind of like, that was her way to score that particular scene of them locking eyes across the fire from each other and kind of like keying in on each other in a romantic way, as opposed to just our kind of gaze on Eloise as a subject. instead of being a subject instead of being romantically gazed at person. So yeah, that was great. Do you want to talk about the end?
Yeah, because I want to ask you a question about something. And by the way, subnote or back to something you were talking about, not a man in sight. What I find interesting about that comment is that I noticed it and how relieved I was that there weren't men in this film and that there wasn't some kind of subplot with a guy. Because one, you don't need it. And two, I think she sets it up, writer director sets it up to make a statement about where women are in this world, not necessarily about men per se, but where women, how women were treated in this society, which we've already talked about to a degree. But when that opening sequence happens and that man is carrying her stuff up to the beach with her and she's ahead of him and he just drops that crap off and turns around and starts to walk away. And she
Yep.
has to scream after him, "Where do I go?" And he's like, "Through through the trees up there." And I'm like, "Dude, you didn't even like say goodbye, nothing."
Well, they didn't even jump out. Nobody jumped out of the boat to get her painting, her canvases for her. She had to jump out
Nope.
on her own.
In that dress.
Yeah.
In that dress, which could have easily drowned her. And it's the
That's what
dress she
Steph said. Steph
Yep.
watched it the second time with me, and she's like, I can't believe she's jumping in the water with that dress on. She's like, she
Yep.
could totally drown.
100%. I think of Ophelia in Hamlet when I saw that scene because that's basically how Ophelia dies in Hamlet. She falls into a river and is pulled down by the weight of her clothes. At least I think that's what happens.
Jeez.
Some people say it's suicide. I would not disagree with that. But smart way to do it because in a way it's not technically her fault if that's what had happened. Shakespeare reference number 2. But it just dawned on me that how much we didn't need a male influence in this film, not because it's a feminist film or it's a woman-centric film or that it's a film about two women in love with each other. It's not about that. The movie was about the choices women had to make in this world and how it wouldn't have done any good to show that. You already knew all that stuff. There was no reason to put a subplot with a man in it. You didn't need to meet her betrothed or you didn't need to know anything except for these men got them there, her there, and this man took her back. That's it. That's all you need. All right, let's talk about the ending.
All right. Well, I mean, we get kind of a setup of the first time. It's so interesting hearing how someone explains music or a symphony, how Marianne tries to explain a symphony to Eloise, because Eloise has never heard, she's only heard like organ music, like that's it. And I just can't imagine, like I don't know how you could put into words something like a symphony, like what a symphony does. And so all she has is that little, I don't know what it is, like a harpsichord, that's like a piano type thing, but it's like this kind of like jangly harpsichord thing that she's able to play that Vivaldi piece, and she kind of describes it as, you know, where that is. It's the summer section of the Four Seasons, and it's when a storm's coming in, and so it's evocative of that storm, but it's just a single instrument, and so it seems like Eloise is interested in that and in what it sounds like, and it sounds different than the probably slower and maybe more evenly paced music that she's used to from the convent. And then we get that same song at the end in the very last scene, where across the way from the opera hall, she hears, or she gets to see, Marianne gets to see Eloise experience that same piece of music, but with a symphony. And I thought that it was so well done. I mean, I think there's practically a reason to not show the symphony, to not show like, oh, look at the violins, they're going at it, you know, really hard. And, you know, oh, look, there's a tuba, and oh, there's the guy playing the triangle. You could do that, but that's not what we as an audience are looking for. Like, we are totally locked in on Eloise because that's exactly what Marianne is locked in on. She never thought that she would ever see Eloise ever again. And now she gets to see, not only does she get to see Eloise in person or like in the physical same space, but she also gets to see her experience this music. And then also that music brings her back, like takes her through this, huge emotional journey over a single shot that she goes through and that we get to go through with her. And I thought that it was just so well done. It's kind of like the film for me. It was like she was holding back the music, and then she just kind of like washes it over us as an audience. We get to they're holding back so much emotion, and then it just gets released. And even in the scenes that they have together, at the end of their specific relationship where they kind of get mad at each other and then they reconcile because they don't have much time left because Eloise's mom is coming back, and there's some definite like emotions going back and forth there, but it's nowhere close to that scene there. You also brought up the fact that did Eloise say don't regret, remember, or was it Marianne? I can't remember.
I didn't write down who said what, and I have another quote
good.
that can go with it. It doesn't matter, to be honest with you.
Either one, but you could tell that Eloise was going through that kind of like, there was like portions of like hearing the music and made her remember. It did make her remember, but then, she was sad that she didn't, maybe make a different choice. And then ultimately she's just happy at the memory of her relationship. And that whole arc, that whole scene was amazing. I want to get your take on it, and then I want to circle back on something whenever you're done.
I'm hoping we're circling back on the same thing because I'm really excited about this. If it is what I think it is. Okay. So I think Eloise says, "Don't regret, remember." I think she says that, and then there's another line. Not everything is fleeting. Some feelings are deep. I think Marianne says that to her. I'm not sure. It doesn't really matter. And there's also the great line of, do all lovers feel they're inventing something? That's the best line ever. I hope I got that right. I want that on a T-shirt so bad. Because when you're deeply in love with somebody, that's exactly what it feels like. You feel like you're the only people who know something, like secrets that the rest of the world doesn't know. And that's an enormously intense feeling. And what I felt at the end was, first of all, it's perfection that song is playing, and you realize it in like 3 notes what's happening. Even if you don't know that music. I happen to know it just because it's in the lexicon of my movie-going experiences, and it's just there. I probably could name the artist right off the bat, and I probably could name the tune right off the bat, but I would recognize it. Can't believe I just called that a tune, but you got what I'm saying.
That old ditty.
So I thought it was perfect. That old ditty. We can shoot that out in 20 minutes. It's a Beatles reference. Anyway, I love the fact that when they're at the art show, we're going to go back just a little further first. When they're at the art show and the guy comes up and goes, "I love your father's work." And she goes, "It's mine. I used his name." And you're like, oh, she entered something. Somebody's congratulating her that her father's art is beautiful, and yet it's her art. And she had to enter the painting into the exhibition in her father's name. That's crazy. Just think about all of the art that we have out there that might possibly have been done by women, but had to be put into a certain...
Ghostwritten.
Yeah, or ghostwritten. Right, exactly. There was a movie last year about that too. Not 2019, but 2018, without giving too much away, because if I told you the movie, you give it away. Anyway.
Yeah, I gotcha.
So, yeah, okay, good. I figured you did. But it's shocking that happens, but at the same time, it's not shocking because we have a plethora of movies that allow us to believe that all of that has happened. Anyway, so you get to the last scene, and I thought that now we might be getting into that like whisper thing. After Lost in Translation, you whisper in somebody's ear. Now at the end of a movie, you never find out what they say, and you wonder the rest of your life what they say. It's happened in a couple of movies since, and I think it's happened in a couple of movies before that too. Oh, doesn't it happen in oh no, he whispers into In the Mood for Love. Is that the name of the film?
Yes.
He whispers into a tree, right?
I think it is a tree, yeah.
But you never hear what he said.
I did get the vibe of that movie in this movie. Just the pace, the deliberate pace of this film was it was very similar.
Lost in Translation is another good comparison of pacing and how that film is about love that doesn't need to be explained. You know what I mean? Like we want to explain it, and we want to classify it as a lesbian love scene or a lesbian love movie. It's not. It's a movie about two people falling in love, just like Lost in Translation is not about an older man and a younger woman falling into a sexual love. And you said something interesting earlier about, I found it interesting that you had to say intimacy, not sexual, but intimacy. I think
Oh,
that's
well, it is
interesting.
sexual. Yeah.
No doubt. But I'm saying that, but what I'm saying is that when you were using the word intimacy, you were using it as a bond between two people. And you had to clarify that it wasn't sexual, not this movie, just whatever the subject you were talking about at the time. And I think it's fascinating that we have to describe intimacy to people because they immediately think sexual, that two
Mm.
people can't be in love without being sexually attracted to each other. And the furthest thing is from the truth. You are in love with your parents, but not in a sexual manner. You love
Hmm.
them, and that's you're in love. You love them. And I've always had a hard time explaining that to people of how I feel about the difference. And a lot of people get it, a lot of people don't. We're not going to go there. I'm just saying that I find it interesting that we have to describe intimacy and then we have to clarify that we didn't mean sexual, that we just meant intimacy between two people. Going back to the end scene, what I thought was just brilliant about it was any other filmmaker might have gone back and forth between the two ladies, between the two women at the end, to
Mm.
see Marianne's reaction to Eloise's reaction, blah, 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 blah. Well, Eloise doesn't see Marianne, so at least we don't see
Yeah.
her see her. So, but it
She
was
doesn't.
just the
Yeah.
one shot. And the reason why I brought up the whispering thing was because, the end scene of Call Me By Your Name is Timothy Chalamet crying into the
Yeah.
fireplace. Whole credit. And this is similar to that, except for it's not a straight on shot of a person's face. It's from the side of her. So I hope we're not in this trend of having a character cry for a prolonged period of time at the end of the
Well,
movie. I mean, although it's done well.
I think this one, I think this one's better, and this is what I wanted to circle back to, and the reason why is because it's the trick that was employed by Celine Sciamma it's a locked off shot for Timothy Chalamet, seeing him, lit by firelight, crying and kind of going through a process of understanding and internalizing his relationship with Armie Hammer's character. I can't remember his name, but this one is similar in what the character goes through. But the way that Siama uses the camera is that I think, and I've scoured the internet to try to figure out if she's been specific about this, or even if the cinematographer was specific about this. But I think that she utilized a digital effect called warp stabilization, or at least that's what they call it in Premiere Pro, which at work, the people that at my TV station that will do editing in creative services, that they make a commercial or they make a promotion for, here's what's coming up at 6 o'clock. Sometimes they get pretty fancy with them, and they do things like they'll use GoPro footage. And when you use GoPro footage, a lot of times, like the GoPro's like shaking around, it's connected to a car or something, or connected to something that's bouncing around, and you can make that bouncy footage, you can make it smooth. And there's other things you can do with tracking in the same software. Is instead of, you can have a locked off shot, like a shot where the camera does not move, and if someone moves inside the camera, like in front of the camera, like in this case Eloise was kind of like heaving back and forth, emotionally processing and experiencing this music that was evoking her memories, and she was breathing heavy, heaving, and instead in a locked off shot you would see her swaying left to right because she's at an angle on the shot. She's moving left, she would be moving left to right. But what they did was that they locked the camera, they locked her position in the frame, in the center of the frame, and things were moving around her. And so it looked like the camera was kind of like panning with her, but I don't think it was. I think what was happening is that we were essentially stuck with her, and every time she moved, we moved, and that connected us to her, connected us as an audience to her and what she's going through, even more than if we were just looking at her from afar or looking at her from a single point of view. We were with her in that experience. And it was done with, I think, a digital effect. It was done with a camera effect. And it was something that was purely emotionally motivated. And I thought, I don't think I've seen that before used in that way. But it was brilliant to me. And in fact, the first time I watched it, like, I was more amazed at that effect than I was at the emotions that were going on during the movie. So I totally missed the point of the end the first time I watched it. I mean, I got it, but I didn't like allow myself to feel anything because I was just so like, this is so cool. This is so amazing. Oh my gosh, she's doing this. This is great. And, and then it was over.
Yeah, but that's your way of feeling it, though. That's your
That's
way
true.
of
Yeah, I was so happy,
that's
but I
cool.
wasn't sad. Like I wasn't like, I don't know. I was
wasn't
just
sad either.
happy. Well, yeah, but I guess I just was happy that someone was able to take filmmaking to another level at that point. And yeah, it was an innovation that I was not expecting. And maybe she's seen it before. I don't know, but maybe this is the first time anybody's done it. I don't know either, but for me at that moment, for this subject matter at this time, it was perfect.
And so that's what you were talking about when they use a computer generated effect, but I won't know what
Yeah,
it is.
exactly.
See, I thought it was something else. Oh, I'm disappointed.
Well, what did you think it was?
Now I feel silly. Now I feel silly
Oh,
'cause I thought, well, is it the fire was enhanced? See, I thought all the fire was fake. Like all of a sudden, I just had this impression because the fire was doing strange things. It seemed to
mm,
be like digitally enhanced. And then there's a shot when the mother sees the portrait at the end. It looked
mm,
like they superimposed the portrait over top of her face,
oh,
I guess digitally. And it looked like it moved for a split second. Like she
hmm.
moved underneath it or the portrait above moved over. Like no. Okay.
No,
Well,
I didn't get that. I mean, that totally could have happened. I didn't see that part, but yeah, I'm sure there were modifications that happened, but I mean, really, I think as far as the fire is concerned, it may look a little different. They're using really high quality cameras. They shot this not on film. They shot it with an 8K camera. So that has 4 times as many pixels as a 4K camera, which has 4 times as many pixels as an HD camera. So, I mean, like it's 16 times more information than an HD TV show or something would have. So it's like the amount of detail and the amount of color fidelity that they have with this film it's off the charts. So they can kind of do whatever they want with it. So the movie may look a little different. Certain things may look a little different because they're captured in such a high quality way that they have the ability to either manipulate it or to accentuate certain things like the fire.
well, now that we've come to the end of the podcast and you think, and everybody knows I think the movie's brilliant, I'm a little pissed off about that because those women, those lead actresses were not only talented as hell, but they don't have a pore on their face. And if they look that great in that much definition, oh my goodness, like that's like wrong because their skin was so pure and so beautiful. Both of those women
Yeah.
were stunningly beautiful, and
Yeah.
the way that their those scarves went around across their faces, but you could still see the texture of the scarves. And go and watch that again. Look at the texture of the scarves or wraparounds, whatever you want to call them, versus that
Hmm.
pure kind of porcelain style of their skin. Yeah, I hate them. I'm mad at them now. I don't like it because no one should look that good in that definition. And they are beautiful.
That's the other thing is that the fact that they're able to show it doesn't matter what's on screen. The cinematography shows either whether it's the female body or whether it's the waves crashing in or fire or whatever it is or even just the painting like a macro version of a portion of the painting. The lighting is in the outdoor scenes it's natural, and in the indoor scenes I thought it was all shot with available light, kind of like, well, we've got, light from the window and that's it. Or we've got light from the fireplace and that's all you get. And the cameras nowadays can handle that. But I did some reading and read an article, an interview with a cinematographer, and like they used so many lights and so many like setups, and it was just like huge undertaking to light this movie. So it is done in such a subtle way on screen that something that I'm usually really sensitive to, it looked so natural to me. So that's the kind of stuff that I try to, really dissect. And when something looks off, doesn't look realistic, then if it's not done in a stylized way, if it's not like, the light coming through the slats of the window shades while the detective does his voiceover, then, that really bugs me. I mean, that's obviously a stylized reason to use like harsh lighting or something like that. But this movie was able to be subtle with its lighting to where it kind of like it integrated seamlessly into the film and didn't show its head and didn't say, hey, look how cool I am. But it serviced the story really well.
It's going to be the film that there's a couple films out there last year, but this one is definitely one of those ones when people bring it up and say, why didn't it get nominated for cinematography? Why didn't it get nominated for screenplay? You almost don't have an answer for that question. You can't say because the other five or whatever. This film is beautiful to look at and it's so well written that it almost seems like, how did something like this get overlooked? But I do want to end with this. I think the beauty of the movie for me is everything that we've talked about, of course. It's has social issues in it and has issues that are specific to women that you come out of the film with a better understanding, regardless if you're a woman or not. I love all of that. But the thing that I love the most about it is that love stories are so often told in movies that we can get jaded to things like that. I can't, but the world can. I love a good love story. It's just something that seemingly always works for me if it's true to its own nature, which this film is definitely true to its own nature. But the thing that I find fascinating is that, people ask you how many people you dated or how long you've dated somebody, or they said, how long is your longest relationship? And that always perplexed me as a question, because I never understood why the length of time you were with somebody qualifies the relationship as something more important than if you weren't. Like, let's say you dated somebody for 6 years. It was more of a relationship than if you dated somebody for 11 months or for 2 weeks or whatever it may be. This film is proof positive that the length of a relationship goes on forever, regardless of whether or not it was 2 weeks or 11 months or 6 years or whatever it is. If it is true love, and that sounds hokey to say, but if it is real between those people, it lasts a lifetime, even if their circumstances change, even if they can't be together. That's why I love the ending. And that's why I love page 28 in the portrait. And it's so well done because it's such a specific part of that page that immediately the audience knows what they're looking at when they're looking at it. It's immediate. Just that like little bubble letter in the corner.
In fact, yeah, when I watched it the second time with Steph, and there's like a wide shot of the whole thing, of the whole picture, and then it kind of like goes, starts at her face, and then tilts down to her daughter's face, and then down a little bit farther to where the bottom of the frame is the book open to page 28, and Steph is like page 28, and then after she said that, then they do an insert shot of a close up of page 28. So I was like, oh well, so they didn't even really need the insert shot of page 28. Because you just bang, you're like, you're looking for something. You're like totally wanting to feel that. Yeah.
Yeah. Your mind goes right to, your heart goes right to page 28. And I was like, I literally said out loud, oh, I love that. Oh, I love that. It's just a really beautiful moment. So this film is a lot of things, and it is textually deep and well written. We've said it all, but it's nice to hear a story about two people who were in love for the amount of time that they were in love, and it lasted a lifetime, and that they can live their life knowing that at least happened to them. Of course, I'm sure there's some form of like, not regret, but some form of like, woe is me, why could my life be that way? But at the same time, when you feel something so deep that you see page 28 and you feel it as an audience member, so they felt it as two people, and then when she has that emotional scene at the end, an emotional breakdown, if you will, or uplifting, depending on how a person wants to look at it, they felt it so deeply that it didn't matter how long it lasted, that will resonate for the rest of their lives. And to me, that's a beautiful thing. And to see it represented in a movie is a really great thing for me, because I think that you have to realize that if you have even come close to having that feeling with another person, how lucky you are and how fortunate that you got to have those feelings in this lifetime. So, yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Me too. All right. Well, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer, and you can tweet us at actorengineer. We'll see you next time.